What would you do if a judge laughed at you just because of your skin? She didn't wear pearls. She didn't speak until spoken to. She wasn't what they expected. So they tried to erase her right there in the courtroom. But what they didn't know was who she really was. This is the story of the day. Justice put on braids, and the world stood corrected. Stay until the end, because how it finishes will change how you see every courtroom from now on. Have you ever watched an entire room pass judgment on someone before they even speak? On a fog-drenched Thursday morning in Atlanta, the courthouse on Pryor Street stood like a solemn cathedral, glass doors gleaming beneath gray skies. Inside, oak benches creaked under the weight of suits and silk, echoing with murmurs and the self-assured footsteps of those who believed they belonged. No one noticed her at first. She moved like smoke, slow and soft. A young black woman in a pale olive blouse and long brown skirt that brushed the tile with each step. Her hair was pulled into a low bun, neat but not styled, and her shoes were worn at the heel but freshly polished. In her hand was a legal pad tucked into a canvas bag with a faded university logo. No briefcase, no badge, no entourage, just a quiet presence. When she entered courtroom 6B, the air shifted. Lawyers glanced up from their tablets. A bailiff tilted his head. A junior clerk leaned toward a colleague and whispered something that made the other woman smirk. Her name was Ariel. But in that moment, she was just that girl. She took a seat 2 rows from the front, her gaze fixed on the bench. Judge Ronald Pembroke hadn't entered yet, but his portrait loomed above the seal behind the gavel, a face carved from decades of self-certainty. The case that morning was high profile. A class action against a national retailer accused of racial profiling and wage theft. The public seats were full. Plaintiffs' attorneys shuffled papers, adjusting lapels and clearing throats. The defense team huddled behind an armada of leather folders. No one questioned why she sat so close to the action. Not yet, but the stares began to itch. A middle-aged man in a cobalt tie turned around and narrowed his eyes. A woman with pearl earrings leaned in, her voice too low to hear, but her glance sharp as glass. Ariel ignored them. Her posture was relaxed but alert. She watched the door, not because she expected anyone, but because people like her were always watched. When the bailiff finally announced, "All rise," she did. Calmly, without flourish. Judge Pembroke entered with the weight of ritual behind him. Robes flowing, glasses perched low. He didn't look at Ariel. Not yet. But the whisper campaign in the courtroom had already begun. Who was she? Was she pressed? A social worker? Someone's cousin? A sympathy prop? Every theory was more patronizing than the last. Still she sat, silent, focused, taking notes in clean cursive. Her hand was steady. Her eyes are unreadable. The case was called. Voices rose. Motions filed. Objections barked. But Ariel didn't flinch. And when the judge looked down and saw her, really saw her, the first crack in his facade appeared. Just a flicker of surprise. A pause too long. Then it passed. The courtroom returned to its rhythm, but she had unsettled something. Something none of them could name yet. A question unspoken. Who is she? The first jab didn't come with a raised voice. It came wrapped in politeness, the kind that cuts deeper because it pretends not to hurt. "Miss, this section is for attorneys and parties," only a clerk said during a recess, not unkind, just dismissive as if stating an obvious fact. Ariel looked up, her expression calm. "I'm aware," she said. Her voice was smooth, deliberate. "I'm observing the proceedings." The clerk blinked, unsure how to respond. He looked around, searching for backup, then gave a stiff nod and walked off. But the energy had shifted again. Now eyes lingered longer. The judgment was no longer whispered. A balding defense attorney nudged his colleague. "Courtroom tourists." "Now," he muttered. The other man snorted. "Looks like someone wandered in from the DMV line." Ariel didn't move, didn't speak. She just kept taking notes. That was when Judge Pembroke finally addressed her. Mid-hearing, unprovoked. "Miss Pardon, are you here with one of the parties?" His tone was not warm. It was the tone of a man used to authority and unchallenged assumptions. Ariel stood. Her voice was steady. "I'm here to observe Your Honor." He stared at her for a beat too long. Then perhaps the gallery in the back would be more appropriate. A few soft laughs rippled across the courtroom, not loud, but cruel. She nodded, gathering her things, her spine straight as a blade. The walk to the back felt longer than it was. Every step is a reminder that presence alone could offend, but it didn't end there. During lunch in the hallway near the vending machines, a young associate from the defense team cornered her. "Hey," he said, with a too wide smile. "You're with the press or something?" She shook her head. "Just here to observe." He looked at her clothes, her shoes, and the canvas bag. "You know the media seats are downstairs, so I've heard her smile was polite but cool." "Well," he said, hesitating. "No offense, but people are wondering who you are." "Then they can ask me," she replied, turning away. But they didn't. They just assumed. Because she didn't look like them. Didn't speak unless spoken to. Didn't carry herself with entitlement, which to them translated as invisibility, or worse, inconvenience. By the time the afternoon session resumed, the whispers had turned into assumptions baked into behavior. One woman in a gray blazer moved her coat when Ariel walked by, as if guarding something precious from someone suspicious. Another man in suspenders gave her a tight-lipped smile and said, "Lost sweetheart," as she entered the courtroom. Ariel didn't flinch. She returned to her seat in the back and resumed her notes. But now her eyes were sharper. Her pen moved faster. Every slight was recorded, not on paper, but in memory. They didn't know who she was, but they were about to. The courtroom was colder that morning, not because of the air, but because of the tone. Judge Pembroke leaned back in his chair, his gavel idle, his eyes scanning the room like a man already weary of the day. The case on the docket was procedural, a motion to dismiss filed by the defense. Nothing explosive, nothing unusual. Until Ariel stood, she had waited until the end, until the moment the judge asked, "Is there any additional statement or input?" Her voice was calm. "Your Honor," she said. "May I speak?" Pembroke narrowed his eyes. "You again," he said. "You're not counsel on record." A chuckle from the defense bench. "No, Your Honor," Ariel said. Steady. "But I have information relevant to the case." Pembroke scoffed. "This is not a town hall." "Miss Jameson," she replied. Ariel. Jameson. The name meant nothing to them. Not yet. He sighed clearly. "Irritated, Miss Jameson. Unless you're a licensed attorney involved in this case, you are not permitted to participate. Please take your seat before I have you removed." A pause. A long, loaded pause. She didn't sit. The clerk shifted nervously. "Judge," she said, her tone respectful. "I am a licensed attorney. I am here under directive from the Oversight Commission." Laughter broke from the gallery. a smattering of sarcastic claps. The defense attorney leaned toward the microphone. "And I'm Clarence Darrow." He smirked. "Come on, Judge, are we really indulging?" This Pembroke's face flushed with irritation. "Miss Jameson, I don't know what sort of stunt you're pulling, but it's disruptive and inappropriate. And frankly quite bold, considering how out of place you clearly are in this court." That word "out of place" hung in the air, like a knife. The defense bench was grinning. The bailiff looked confused. Ariel stood firm. "I have credentials, I have clearance, and I have a signed affidavit in my bag, Your Honor." "Then produce it," Pembroke snapped. "Or leave." She reached slowly into her canvas tote. But the moment she did, a murmur rippled through the room. A woman in the gallery clutched her pearls. A man in the second row muttered, "She's pulling something." A panicked voice called bailiff, and within seconds chaos cracked open. The bailiff rushed forward. "Hands where I can see them," he barked. "Ma'am, step away from the bag." "It's just my file," Ariel said. Her voice was steady, but a hint of pain flickered in her eyes. "I said, step away." The judge banged his gavel. "Enough, remove her. I've had it with this circus." And just like that, in front of the full courtroom, under the light of justice itself, Ariel Jameson, Harvard Law, graduate award-winning litigator, and bar-certified federal counsel, was dragged toward the exit like a criminal. Her bag fell, papers spilling. Her ID badge skidded across the floor. A photo, a seal, her bar number. But no one looked. No one cared. Not yet. The gavel still echoed. The gallery buzzed. A man sneered. "This is what happens when they let anyone in." A woman whispered, "I bet she faked the badge." Judge Pembroke didn't look up, didn't ask questions, just muttered. Finally, some peace. Ariel didn't struggle. She didn't shout. But as she was pulled through the doors, her eyes burned, not with tears, with memory and a plan. The doors hadn't yet closed behind her when a second door burst open. A sharp click of heels echoed. A woman in a dark gray suit entered with a briefcase clutched to her chest, and urgency carved into her every step. "Excuse me, Your Honor," she called. Her voice sliced through the noise like a siren through fog. "This court has just made a serious error." Pembroke scowled, annoyed. "And who are you?" he snapped. "Claire Matthews, Director of Attorney Oversight, Fifth Circuit Division," she said, producing a folded document from her case. "And you've just publicly humiliated a federal lawyer, assigned under judicial review authority." The defense attorney blinked. "Wait." What Pembroke leaned forward, confused. "Assigned who? Ariel Jameson," she said. "Your Honor, she's not just a licensed attorney. She's a bar-certified civil rights litigator and was assigned by the Department of Justice 3 days ago to observe and document any signs of judicial bias." Silence fell like a thunderclap. The gavel trembled in Pembroke's hand. He glanced toward the bailiff, who was now frozen, one hand still on the courtroom door. Claire turned toward the gallery, raising a laminated badge between 2 fingers. "This is her identification," she said. "This is her federal clearance. And this." She bent down and picked up the file that had spilled when Ariel was dragged. "Is the affidavit she was instructed to deliver in this court today." The room went still. The defense attorney's smirk melted. Pembroke turned pale. "This is impossible," he muttered. "Where she didn't identify herself properly." Claire's eyes flared. "She did. You refused to listen because of how she looked." She snapped the affidavit open. Page 1, line 2, assigned counsel, Ariel N. Jameson, esque line. 3, oversight focus pattern of race, based microaggression, and professional dismissal in courtroom environments. The irony landed like a gut punch. Claire's voice rose, steely and resolute. "And you've just given her exhibit." A murmurs rippled through the gallery. Someone whispered, "She was planted." Another voice gasped, "They sent her here on purpose." And then the doors opened again. Ariel re-entered. Her eyes are calm. Her bag was now slung back over her shoulder. Behind her, a man in a tailored Navy suit entered, her legal associate from the DOJ. Claire nodded to her counsel. She said, "Would you like to proceed?" Ariel walked forward. No escort now. No restraint. Her blouse wrinkled, her dignity untouched. She approached the bench and gently placed the badge Claire had recovered on the desk in front of Pembroke. "As I was saying earlier," she said, "I have relevant information for the court." The judge couldn't speak. His lips moved, but no sound emerged. The gallery buzzed louder, now whispers morphing into shame. She was telling the truth. Someone said, "We all saw what they did. They dragged her out like she was a criminal." Ariel turned to the room, her voice calm but thunderous. How many others have been silenced before they could even speak? Dismissed for their appearance, their skin, their lack of $1,000 suit? No one answered. Her gaze swept the room. This is not just a legal issue, it's a cultural one. And today, in this courtroom, justice failed. Pembroke rose, slowly, his eyes avoiding hers. "Miss Jameson." "Counselor." "I apologize," he murmured. But it was too late. The damage was done. The live stream, which someone had begun quietly moments before, was already viral. The clip of her being dragged. The judge's comments. The badge reveal. It was all public now. And this courtroom, this moment was already history. The courthouse lobby was in chaos by midday. Reporters flooded the marble floor, their cameras raised like weapons, all trained on a single name, Ariel Jameson. Outside, a wall of news vans stretched down the block, microphones catching every soundbite, every gasp from shocked officials. Across the nation, social media exploded. The video had already hit 1 million views in under 2 hours. Headlines blazed across screens. Federal judge humiliates black. DOJ lawyer bias in the courtroom. Watch. This Ariel Jameson, the woman who took on the robe. At the DOJ, phones rang non-stop. The director of legal oversight issued an emergency press release. "We stand with Ms. Jameson. Her assignment was valid. Her presence legal. Her treatment is unacceptable." In the courtroom upstairs, Judge Pembroke sat pale and sunken in his chambers. The Judicial Conduct Board had already called. So had the U.S. Attorney's Office. A formal inquiry was being launched, immediate and severe. Within hours, he was placed on administrative leave. His law clerk resigned. His legacy, once measured in citations and law reviews, now dragged through the mud of his own prejudice. His face was plastered across news channels, frozen in that moment of failure. But the reckoning didn't stop there. Marissa, the clerk who smirked as Ariel was escorted, was suspended indefinitely. The bailiff Vince issued a formal apology before quietly tendering his resignation. The defense attorney who laughed along and dismissed her as a fraud was referred to the Bar Association for misconduct. He, too, would face hearings of his own. And inside the courtroom gallery, those who had watched in silence now spoke. Jurors, who had once smiled at the judge's jokes, now questioned their verdicts. Witnesses who once stayed quiet began filing statements of concern. Old transcripts resurfaced, rulings reviewed, appeals reignited. Across the justice system, a tremor began. This wasn't just about one judge, it was about all of them. The ones who never asked, who always assumed, who judged the person before hearing the case. Law schools began using the footage in lectures on systemic bias. Advocacy groups launched initiatives demanding that courtroom cameras be standard. A petition calling for a national judicial bias audit gained 500,000 signatures in 3 days. Meanwhile, Ariel, she did not bask in the spotlight. She remained calm, poised, and focused. She returned to work, not as a victim, but as a vanguard. In an interview on 60 Minutes, she said, "What happened to me isn't rare. What's rare is that someone recorded it, and this time, the world was watching." When asked if she'd forgive Pembroke, she paused, then answered, "Forgiveness is personal. Accountability is public." The line went viral. Judges across multiple states began undergoing bias training. The DOJ proposed a new protocol requiring diversity in every legal panel. Young black lawyers from across the country began reaching out to Ariel. One wrote, "I almost dropped out last year. Then I saw you. Now I'm staying." Another said, "You reminded me that I belong in this room, no matter who tries to say otherwise." Even Pembroke's own law school, his alma mater, released a statement. His actions violated the very core of what justice demands. "We disavow them, but we commend the courage of Ms. Jameson." Ariel had changed more than a court case. She had shifted a culture. The courthouse stood quieter now, not because the world had moved on, but because it was still listening. Months had passed since that day. The day a woman in braids and a simple blazer had been mocked, shamed, and erased, only to return unmasked, undefeated, and unforgettable. Ariel Jameson didn't seek fame. She sought fairness, but fame came anyway. Law journals dubbed her the thunder behind the robe. Civil rights panels requested her insight. Ivy League law schools offered her guest lectures, but she declined most of them. "I'm still doing the work," she would say, "the kind that doesn't need a podium." She returned to her post at the DOJ, her office modest, but her presence commanding. Interns watched her with reverence. Colleagues called her the standard judges, whispered her name before ruling, afraid to make the mistake Pembroke made. Her quiet fire had become a reckoning. The courtrooms changed, not overnight, but unmistakably. Bailiffs trained to de-escalate, not demean. Clerks taught to serve with neutrality. Attorneys reviewed old footage with new eyes, realizing how many Ariels had passed through unnoticed. In Atlanta, a young woman named Nevaeh, first-year law student, who once almost gave up after being mistaken for the janitor in the law library, stood before a mock trial jury, with her shoulders high. Because of Ariel, she told the room, "I know I don't have to shrink." In Oakland, a teenage girl asked her guidance counselor, "How do I become her in courtrooms across the country?" when a black woman stood and introduced herself as counsel. The silence that once dripped with doubt was now edged with respect, or at least caution. Pembroke's name faded, remembered not for his rulings, but for his ruin. But Ariel's legacy spread in waves, not flashy, not loud, but permanent. There was now a plaque outside the federal courthouse in D.C. Just beneath the statue of blind justice. It read, "In honor of every voice once dismissed, and the one who refused to stay silent one morning." Ariel sat alone in that same courtroom. The bench was empty, the room still. Her fingers traced the wood of the witness stand, the place where she was judged before she could speak. She took a breath. Calm, present. Then she stood and walked out, not with vengeance, but with purpose. Because justice, she knew, wasn't a moment. It was a movement. and she was its living spark. She never needed to yell. Her silence was her speech. Her dignity was her protest. And her legacy wasn't just carved in marble. It was engraved in every heart that now knew the next time someone enters the room, dressed in simplicity, but burning with quiet brilliance. Think twice before you dismiss her, because the next Ariel might be watching, and she won't wait to be believed. She'll write the verdict herself. They thought she was just another black woman in the wrong place, but she was the law. She was the legacy, and she was the change they never saw coming. Today, courtrooms stand quieter, not from fear, but from respect. Somewhere a young girl walks into law school with her head high, knowing she belongs. Somewhere, a judge hesitates before mocking the next woman who doesn't fit their mold, because the day Ariel stood up, she didn't just defend herself, she rewrote the rules. So if this story moved, you share it. Not for clicks, but because the next Ariel is out there, and she deserves a world that listens the first time. You can silence a voice, but you cannot silence truth.